Those days were anything but silent. There were the new sounds of machine guns and the new strategies of air warfare, and then the new deployment of chemical weapons that fell upon the once peaceful lands of Belgium and France for what everyone initially thought would be a war of short duration, not for blood-filled years. Just 4 months into what will be titled first the Great War and later World War I, Pope Benedict XV proposed a temporary truce to celebrate Christmas in 1914. But both political as well as military leaders on either side of the conflict refused. The soldiers in the trenches, though, had their own ideas, and they risked insubordination and even their lives to celebrate Christmas. It is Christmas Eve, 1914, and on the Western Front, a line of carnage and destruction that would stretch some 440 miles from Switzerland to the North Sea. Politicians and military officers are only planning additional warfare over the Christmas season. It was the Germans, the German trench soldiers, that began their Christmas offensive on Christmas Eve. But not with bullets or deployments or even weapons, but with their voices. They began their attack with the German lyrics of Silent Night, Stille Nacht, piercing the silence of the Western Front. The words are familiar to us in English. And the British Expeditionary Force counterattacked with singing the first Noel. Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright. No firing of a machine gun piercing the battlefield, just lyrics expressing a calm, silent, and bright-filled night. The first Noel, the angel did say, was to certain poor shepherds in fields as they lay. Two nations, Germany and Great Britain, politically and militarily engaged in the wanton destruction of life and property, strangely now engaged in a battle of Christmas carols rather than casualty counts. Among the young men, barely past their teens, most of them, deployed by old men to fight for tired treaties and vaunted national interests. After a little while of this skirmishing of lyrics, some scouts from each side began to climb up out of the trenches and into the area of no man's land, that area that abandoned by both sides, filled with carnage, and met each other, shook hands, and wished each other Merry Christmas. And then as the night increasingly became Christmas morning, more soldiers climbed out of their trenches, bearing still the weapons of war, of course, the military uniform, the weapons. And yet as the morning came, they also came bearing gifts. Gifts of cigarettes, small pieces of chocolate. Not a single bullet fired Christmas Day, 1914. In a land filled with the necessary supplies of war, someone found a soccer football to bring up to no man's land in a game between the German soldiers and the British boys began in earnest. This insubordination, this informal truce among the lowest participants within the combatants. Muddy and already war-weary men singing carols in the middle of the night. Now a hopeful and daring act of peacemaking has just broken out, reaching out through the dark and the barbed wire and the smoke of recent battles, and the ever-present orders of those commanding officers and rulers of every time and place to keep up the fight that sends others to their battles, their agendas, their priorities. Not risking themselves, but the sons of others, of course, for the glory of peace among nations who still look suspiciously at one another. Every Christmas carol is really an olive branch, a reminder, a way of seeing life with God, not for battlefields and battlefield glory, but rather as a ball field, even if it just passes in a moment, not as the edge to an abyss, an absent of the holy location, but as even a promised land, a reconciled place. The Christmas truce of 1914 helps us understand what Christmas really is. It is an armistice. It is an experience. It is a taste of the peaceable kingdom to come. A desolate field restored on earth as it is in heaven. Christmas begins with hope. The goal of which it points to is always peace. God's peace. Gardens that are planted in the midst of battlefields, former enemies transformed into companions of life. The orders of the politicians and commanding officers of the Great War remain fragile, frozen in time, and locked behind display cases of war museums or filing cabinets of government offices, where men and women born decades or to even now a century following the conflict now work on today's troubles and difficulties and negotiations that still draft orders for weapons rather than songbooks for peace. Both the belligerent as well as the beleaguered have ceased their mortal breath in that conflict, with the children of those war survivors, those few who would recall their moment of insubordination that Christmas Eve and day in 1914, now in the twilight of their lives. It is quiet on the Western Front in 2020. Then the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all people shall see it together. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken.